All right, welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at something that caught our eye recently, Apple's scramble to patch this vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
CVE 2025-24201.
Right.
And, we don't usually like to hit the panic button just because it's,
Yes.
a regular old Patch Tuesday.
Yeah.
This wasn't that
Right.
Apple issued an emergency fix for this thing because this zero-day vulnerability was being actively exploited
Yeah.
out in the wild, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
a big deal.
a big deal, right?
Yeah.
So what is it about this vulnerability that even has Apple, kind of sweating a little bit?
Yeah.
Let's find out.
Well, the interesting thing here is that this vulnerability is in WebKit.
Okay.
And a lot of people think WebKit and they think Safari Apple's browser.
Right.
But it's so much bigger than that. I mean, WebKit is really the engine that's driving a lot of applications across Apple's entire ecosystem.
Right.
You're talking iOS, iPadOS, visionOS,
Wow.
and it even pops up in some Linux and Windows environments.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so a vulnerability here is not just, a crack in the foundation. It's a potential fault line running through the whole thing. So.
To add on to this problem, we're talking about an out-of-bounds right issue.
Right.
And I know our listeners are pretty savvy, but for anyone who needs a refresher, what does that actually mean in this context?
So an out-of-bounds right issue is essentially where you try and put data in a place in memory where it's not supposed to go. Like, think of it like a parking garage.
Okay.
Each parking spot is a designated space in memory, and out-of-bounds right is like a rogue car squeezing into a spot that it shouldn't, bumping into other cars, maybe even causing like a pileup.
Oh, jeez.
And in WebKit, what that means is an attacker could write data into memory locations they're not supposed to access, which can give them a foothold to potentially bypass. Security measures inject malicious code and essentially hijack your device.
That sounds bad.
It's a really bad joyride to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Apple's been saying that, this is a targeted attack.
Yeah.
It's not widespread. Does that at all change the, threat level here?
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Okay.
I mean, it certainly changes the level of immediate concern for the average user. But the fact that this vulnerability exists and has been exploited, even in a targeted attack, means that those techniques can be refined, repurposed, and eventually scaled up to hit a much broader audience. So it's still a concern. And the language that Apple used in their advisory is very similar to one that they released back in February of 2025, which also mentioned a sophisticated attack on specific individuals.
So it's almost like a sequel,
But
not one we want to see.
Yeah.
So who are the likely suspects here, in this whole whodunit?
Well, Apple hasn't really given us a lot of details.
Which is understandable.
Right.
But based on what we do know,
Right.
the targets, the level of sophistication, we can kind of speculate a little bit. We could be looking at nation-state actors, especially if those targeted individuals had access to
sensitive information. Or it could be the work of private exploit brokers, those groups that discover and sell vulnerabilities to the highest bidder.
Interesting.
No questions asked. Either way, the fact that this is happening again really raises some concerns about WebKit's overall security.
So if we're, in this high-stakes game of cat and mouse, what can people actually do to protect themselves? Apple did mention something called lockdown mode.
Yeah.
Is that just a fancy marketing term, or is it actually something worth considering?
Lockdown mode is the real deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like entering witness protection for your device. It really dramatically limits functionality by disabling certain features, restricting communication with external sources, and really kind of cutting off any potential entry points for attackers. It's a trade-off for sure, convenience for security. But for people who are at high risk, journalists, activists, or anyone who might be targeted, it's a really crucial layer of protection.
So kind of like a digital safe house. Yeah. Okay, so the big takeaway for our listeners today is that even in a so-called walled garden, like Apple's ecosystem, zero-day vulnerabilities are very real and present danger.
They are.
Especially when a critical component like WebKit is involved. And this is the second time in recent months that we've seen this play out. And it's starting to feel like a pattern, not just a blip on the radar. So what does that tell us about the future of cybersecurity?
Well, I think it's a clear sign that we're in an arms race. Attackers are only getting more sophisticated, their methods are more advanced, and even these tech giants like Apple are having a really hard time keeping pace, which means that we need to be more proactive about our own defense. staying updated, understanding the threats,
Right.
and even considering stronger security measures like lockdown mode if our situation calls for it.
So basically, complacency is not an option anymore.
No, it really isn't.
All right, so everyone go check for those updates. Make sure you're running the latest versions of your software. A few minutes now can save you a whole lot of trouble later. And as always, stay vigilant.